Hey Flock, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios, and welcome to Just Paint the Base, the series where I show you how to create stunning bases just using paint, no Flock 3D printing or other materials needed. I'm calling this one waterlogged wood because it reminds me of a dock covered in old algae. You could also just leave the green part out and just get a nice wood flooring. I'm starting with a plain base that's been primed gray, and I'm giving it a base coat of P3 Guncore Brown. Now the exact color here doesn't matter too much, I just want to use a nice rich sort of mid-tone brown, nothing too dark and nothing too bright. You want to stay away from a really deep brown or a khaki basically. You'll want to make sure the base coat is nice and even, gives you really good coverage. If you need to, do 2 or 3 coats. Make sure this is just nice and crisp and solid. Here I'm just going ahead and adding a second coat over that first one, making sure the color is nice and consistent. Once that brown base coat is down, I'm going to use some Higgins Black Magic to draw on the rough shape of my planks of wood. You can do this with a pen, with a pencil. It honestly doesn't really matter what tool you use here. I just really like working with this, and it's an opportunity to practice my line work at the same time. So I start out by defining the planks of wood on the base, and you can vary the width here if you want. They don't all have to be really perfect, especially if you're going for more of a ramshackle kind of base. But I do this by creating a bunch of mostly parallel lines, and then rotating the base 90 degrees and breaking those up into smaller pieces of wood by basically drawing some lines between them just to kind of show where a plank starts and ends. Once I've got the boards defined, my next task is going to be adding a little bit of detail to them by sort of chipping up the end of the board where they meet. I'm going to do that by just adding some little tiny lines, some little scratches in the direction of the wood grain along each board. Now in my case, I'm envisioning something like an old dock or ship flooring. If you're thinking of something a little more modern, a little more clean, you probably would just skip this step. The purpose of these lines is to help make the boards look a little bit more worn and also to infer which direction the grain is going, which should always be lengthwise with the plank. Now I'm going to add some grain to the wood and also some highlights using some P3 Hammerfall Khaki. If I was using Citadel paints, I'd probably use Morghast Bone or maybe Xandri Dust at this point. So the first thing I'm doing is adding a highlight along a specific side of each plank. In this case, I'm using the side that's just facing the left, and I'm keeping that same line on every single plank. Once I've got that laid down, I'm going to start adding some wood grain as well, and this is just a series of lines to kind of break up and just flow roughly in the direction of the plank. You can curve them a little bit, give it a little bit of like a knotty appearance as well. You'll see one here where I just kind of do almost an oval with 2 different lines kind of converging around each other. And this really just starts to form the shape of the wood grain. This doesn't have to be precise, it can be really fast and loose. You just want these mostly straight, kind of broken lines. Now I'm going to take a really dark brown, in this case P3 Umbral Umber, and basically do the exact opposite of the last step. Using Citadel paint, I would probably use either Mournfang Brown or Thondia Brown here. Now with this darker color, I'm mostly painting it into the gaps between the lighter colors, but I'm also letting it overlap them once in a while so that we get a couple different tones happening from all the wood. It gives it a more natural feel. Much like how I added a highlight to the left side of every plank, I'm going to go ahead and add a dark line which creates a shadow to the right side of every plank. And that basically helps give them more visual depth, makes them feel like they're a little bit raised up off the base. Now at this point I'll give the base a once over, and if there's any areas that feel like they're too bright, I'll glaze them down with a little bit of this darker brown, thinned down with some water or some medium, just to help push the color back a little bit. Now I want to paint on some nail heads holding the floorboards down, and to start that I'm going to use my Higgins Black Magic again and just create some little black dots that I can put a little tinier gray dot inside of to represent the nail. I'm going to add 1 or 2 of these to the end of each board, and it's as simple as just making a little dot and waiting for it to dry. Intuitively, this process might feel backwards, but I promise you it's a lot easier to put a gray dot inside of a black circle than to try and outline a single gray dot. Now I'm going to use a little bit of a neutral gray, in this case P3 Ironhull Grey, to paint on those nail heads. If you're using a Citadel paint, Dawnstone is pretty close. This process is honestly really straightforward. It's just about getting a little tiny gray dot inside of each black circle. And if it, bleeds outside the circle a little bit or isn't really well centered, it really won't matter too much. Always keep in mind that we're painting bases here, and if you do end up with a blemish somewhere, you can probably just hide it under a character's foot. I've still got some black ink on my palette, so I'm going to go ahead and use that to paint the base rim. You can use any color you want here, it's the base rim. We know what to do with these. Now once the base rim is done, this whole base is basically finished, but I want to go ahead and add some more color to it, make it feel a little bit more waterlogged and worn like an old dock. So I'm going to go a few steps further. So I want to make the wooden planks look like they're kind of stained with algae. I'm going to start using some P3 Bog Moss to do that, and I've really got this thinned down with medium, so it's just a bit of a colorful tint. Nurgle's Rot or Hobgrot Hide are really close to this in the Citadel range. So I've got this color really thinned down, so it's basically a glaze, and I'm just scribbling it onto the wooden planks to give them a little bit of just some color variation, make them look like they're a little bit greener and yuckier in a few spots, basically. Now I'm pretty happy with this, but I think I can take it a little bit further and make it look more like algae instead of just staining, so I'm going to use a little bit of a brighter color here. I'm using P3 Eldritch, which is kind of a bit of a teal color, and I've just thinned that down and mixed it in with the Bog Moss to give it just a little bit more vibrancy. And I'm adding that along the edges of the planks where I feel algae would accumulate and not get worn down by foot traffic on the boards. In the Citadel paint range, I'd probably use Cavalite Green for this. Now I'm really happy with how this is starting to look like a really old waterlogged dock that's just got years of algae build up and wash off on it. But it's starting to feel a little bit too teal to me, so I mixed a little bit of the P3 Bog Moss back in, and I'm pushing that color back over the Eldritch just a little bit, giving some variation in the tone and just make it feel a little bit more green. And there we go, a waterlogged wooden base requiring no sculpting, no green stuff, no sand, no carving wood, and no 3D printing. Just paint the base. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.